Hey, GrowWire listeners. Hey, what if I just said, hey? Hello. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Fritz Nelson, and that other voice you heard was Kendall Fisher, producer and host of The GrowWire Show.
Hi.
Hey.
Ho.
Hey. Ho.
Oh.
Hey.
Yeah, hello.
All right, Kendall, today we're talking with Gary Bolles. He is the chair of the Singularity University, a co-founder of eParachute. Now, his father wrote the famous business book, What Color Is Your Parachute? And Gary has played key roles, including founder and CEO at various startups. He's a sought-after speaker, a writer, and he also happens to have been my very first boss.
I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, he's such a good guy. He was a very good boss. And I was thrilled to pick his brain on a number of things, but most important, the future of work. Now, Gary gets into the nuts and bolts of it, discussing the shift into a digital working economy and what that means. And that is a shift that he compares to that of the agricultural and industrial shifts of decades prior. So we'll get into that a little bit. And he discusses the impact that this shift will have on the workforce, that it's already having on the workforce. And we drill down even further, talking about how education will need to change in order to prepare future generations for that shifting workforce and where it's going. He dives into non-traditional working and leadership roles. He uses real-life examples of companies who are doing it right now and why companies must have a drive for social change now more than ever. So all of this coming up next.
You're listening to the GrowWire podcast, a place where you will learn the ins and outs of growing a business, running a business, or even taking your big idea, career, or personal development to the next level. It's all possible. Our host, Fritz Nelson, the editor-in-chief of GrowWire.com, will take you on an exploration of growth through candid conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in entrepreneurship, entertainment, business development, and more. Whatever your goal, we know you'll walk away with the right tools to help fuel your journey of growth.
We also want to make sure you've tuned into some of our other podcast episodes with thought-provoking conversations just like this one. We've interviewed athletes like former Lakers player Metta World Peace, entrepreneurs like Jason Calacanis, NASA engineers, nonprofit leaders. You can listen in on your commute to work, during your lunch break, while you're traveling, or whenever and wherever you'd like. All of our podcast episodes are available on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So I just introduced you, Gary, but I just want to tell this story because we've known each other for way more decades than I want to say out loud on a microphone. But we met because you were my first boss in the profession of journalism. And after a short amount of time, relatively speaking, in the world of journalism, you then went on to do all these other things. A lot of consulting work, speaking, public speaking work, working for, doing work for Singularity University, The Future of Work, eParachute, dozens of other companies and entities. And so I say all of that as a way to say that you are kind of the definition of the future of work. Like, it's not defined as this one thing that I got trained on in school and that was going to be my profession and that's all I did for the rest of my life. You have changed and morphed and become the things you wanted to be. So I thought that was a good, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a good kind of setup for what we're going to talk about, which is the future of work. So go. No. So if you had to define the future of work and what that means, how would you describe it?
So first, Fritz, just because we've been friends for so long, you've just immediately cut to the heart of one of my greatest challenges, which is an advanced case of adult attention deficit. So one of the things I think of as a defining characteristic, and any of your listeners can determine whether or not they think it's a strength or an inveterate weakness, but I'm just endlessly curious. I just constantly find new things that are fascinating to me, to a fault. And so what I've found is that so many of the things that we've thought of as anchors in the way we work, the context in which each of us works, what we think work is, we have sort of these old rules. We've got ways that each of us, especially older workers, that we were sort of trained in, especially in a sort of post-World War II world, which many of us grew up in. And so I think of those old rules as being things like one person, one job, working in an organization that has a hierarchy, typically working in that field or that arena for a good long period of time, developing a skill set fairly early on, whether it's by getting a 2-year or 4-year degree or a technical certificate, and then staying in that field for a good length of time. And all those old rules, there's still plenty of work opportunities like that. But what we're doing is we're shifting into what I call a digital work economy, where I believe more and more of those traditional rules that have sort of guided how we think about work, how we get hired for work, the way we grow and develop in our work, those rules are all shifting as we speak. And there's a framing a friend of mine, Phil Zelikow, uses, and he says that basically we're going through a shift as big as when we shifted from agricultural to industrial economies, but we're shifting to what I call a digital work economy. And so because those rules, we're all making them up as we go along, there's a couple of different ways that I've tried to help people to understand how that's changing. And if we look at them instead as actually a new set of rules for the way our economies are going to work, as opposed to just disruption, we can see the threads, the bright red threads that guide the trends that we're all living through. And rather than just feeling like this is just a series of disruptions, we can actually get ahead of them. We can actually build our own strategies for being able to manage our lives and our careers.
So let's break that down. What does that mean for the individual? I mean, you kind of jokingly, self-mockingly talked about it as a form of attention deficit, but I think we all don't like, I'm just going to hypothesize, we all don't like to think of ourselves in a single dimension. We all get, even if we have a job we love, we look over and we say, oh, well, that'd be fun to do. 2, we develop hobbies, we develop side projects, and so we all have some of that in us. So what does this new digital work economy mean for the individual? For me, thinking about what my career looks like if I'm young, if I'm middle-aged, if I'm old, how should I start thinking about it?
So this is a big, messy arena. Lots of people talk about the future of work and the future of learning, and they bring in dozens of different issues. Everything from the question of whether or not robots and software will take all of our jobs to the issues of how we can become lifelong learners. And I try to, because I'm a simple guy, distill it down to what I call 4 domains of the future of work: individuals, organizations, communities, and countries, especially sort of like the policies by which we guide ourselves. And so you started off with individuals, so that's actually the best place, is each of us as individuals, there's lots of different things that we want in our lives. But when it comes specifically to work, what I say is, you kind of distill it down. The major problem domain is, how can each of us have the ability to either have access to or to create meaningful, well-paid work today and tomorrow? Now, there's lots of other things we want in our lives, but if everybody on the planet could either find or create meaningful, well-paid work, we'd probably all be okay. Well, that's not the world that we have. And there always are mismatches in markets. There are always been times in the past where technology and wars and major changes in borders, and those all have major impacts on the world of work. And we've all sort of navigated those changes, and eventually economies sort of recalibrate. What we don't know is if this time is different, because what we often call at Singularity University exponential technologies are having such a transformative impact on our lives in such a short period of time that the ripple effects are creating what I call a rapid pace of change and a rapid spread of change. So what does that mean? the pace of change, if you think of these technologies that suddenly appear seemingly out of nowhere and then are dramatically transforming our lives. If I had told you, if you were the head of a cab company and I had told you back in, say, 2010, that there was going to come a time where people would be walking around with what I call these digital distraction devices, these cell phones that we all have. And somebody was going to tap a button on a cell phone and a stranger's car was going to drive up and you were going to open the door. Didn't your mother ever tell you not to get into a stranger's car? You're going to open the door and you're going to say Ahmed and he's going to say Gary and you're going to get into the car. You're going to go to your destination and get out and you would never exchange a dime. And if I told you, if you were the head of a cab company, I told you that in 2010, you would say that's crazy. Consumers won't take that kind of behavior. That just won't happen. And yet here we are today with Lyft and Uber. And so
I would have said there's going to be self-driving cars.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But that's okay. But that's another example. So the reason we call these exponential technologies is Ray Kurzweil is one of the co-founders of Singularity University. Ray has written a book called The Singularity is Near, another one called The Singularity is Nearer, and I guess the next one will be The Singularity is Nearest. But the basic premise is that you can plot these technologies on a curve that is exactly exponential. So when you look at Moore's law, the belief that essentially the performance of microprocessors doubled every 18 to 24 months, and the cost dropped precipitously in the same way. That actually is true of technology after technology after technology. You've got half the people on the planet have these digital distraction devices in about 10 years. I mean, the iPhone was only announced a little over 10 years ago. You've got more than 2 billion people as customers of Facebook. And so these technologies seem to come out of nowhere, but because they're exponential, that is, they're going through this really rapid growth curve, suddenly the pace of change is accelerating. And so that's one of the ripple effects in work, is if you were relevant in your knowledge of a programming language a year and a half ago, if you have not learned anything new, you are now irrelevant. There are all sorts of new ways to use that language in totally different ways. But it's also the spread of change, because in the past, if there was a new technology or if the economy shifted, for instance, post-World War II, we shifted to a consumer economy in the United States. The spread, the difference from one job to another was actually often not that big a jump. But if you today are a coal miner, you today are working in a factory and the factory shuts down or the coal mine shuts down, and you could suddenly transform yourself into an artificial intelligence programmer, you could walk out of Stanford at the age of 23 and make $250,000 a year. But the spread, the difference between those two jobs is a huge leap. And our education systems, the hiring processes that we use, the ways that we continually upgrade ourselves as human beings, all of those systems are still calibrated for those old rules of work, and they're just not up to the task.
So what does that mean for the individual? I mean, how do I start to? I mean, it feels like it means a lot of opportunity, but it also means there's a lot of chaos and confusion that I have to get in touch with.
So thank you for anchoring the balloon again, because I'll often go off on my own tangent. So the answer is a couple of things. Is first off, for individuals, if what we're all trying to do is to find or create meaningful, well-paid work, but the world is changing very, very rapidly, then we first need a mind shift. I actually was one of the things that makes it very ironic that I talk about often the future of learning and the future of education, especially higher education, is that I was never interested in college. I barely got a toe wet. I barely escaped from high school. But what I ended up doing is I fell into the family business, and my father was a recovering minister. He himself had been laid off. He went to go write a book to help other ministers who'd been laid off, and he sort of transformed it into what's known now as the world's career manual, What Color is Your Parachute, which has 10 million copies in print, 17 languages. And so rather than going to college, I sort of fell into the family business. So I was trained as a career counselor at the age of 19. Well, after my father wrote Parachute, which was really about finding your job or career, he realized, there's all these other issues that we're dealing with as well. And so he wrote another book called The 3 Boxes of Life. And here was his basic premise. We have this big chunk of learning at the beginning of our lives. Then we have a big chunk of work. And then we have a big chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. And so those 3 boxes were actually the arc of our lives. But nobody told you that when you were born. Nobody came to your parents and said, okay, here's the user manual of this kid. Here's the arc that this kid's going to go through. Oh, and these are the sequence. You've got to get this whole bunch of learning at the beginning of your life. Then you've got to amortize that investment through your work time. And then when you're too old to enjoy it, you're going to have all this leisure time. Well, so kids come out of school nowadays, and sure, they might get a day job, but then they're also driving for Lyft or Uber at night, and they're working on a startup with their friends, and then they take a gap year, and then they're learning online, and then so I call that a portfolio of work. So I take that image of these 3 boxes and I say, what if instead it is actually a pastiche? It's a canvas of a continually moving landscape of each of those different elements. And so in this world of exponential change, it turns out it's a rational response by kids who are seeing a number of pretty predictable results. There's an eroding contract between the employer and the employee. That's why I talk about hirers and workers, not so much employers and employees. There is a constantly changing world where there's always new projects and new things to do. And so just like your investment counselor would tell you to have a safe bet, that's your day job, and have a risky bet, that's working on a startup with your friends, and a couple things in between. Parents ask me all the time, why won't my kid get a real job? Well, this is why. It's a portfolio of work. That's what they are constantly doing. And so it just so happens I sort of fell into that model myself as a recovering journalist when I sort of emerged out of journalism, and I ended up doing everything from developing strategic conferences to consulting and lecturing around the world.
Software startups.
I just sort of built this as time went on because it allowed me to have a range of variety, have my finger in a bunch of different things, but the world doesn't prepare us for that. That traditional, the old rules of work, the old rules of learning, our schooling isn't preparing us for that. Nobody is giving us that user manual, and so we're making it up as we go along. The good news is we get variety, we get to have this tremendous range of experiences and interactions with different people in different contexts. The challenge is that nobody taught us how to manage this, and it has a lot of precarity to it. That is, it isn't work as a steady state, like one person, one paycheck. Think of it as a fever chart. And it's often dipping way up above what you need to be able to have a lifestyle and way below, and just constantly moving up and down. And so that's actually the greatest challenge of our time. It's not whether or not there's full employment or, there are countries around the world where, for instance, in Spain, where 50% of all the people under 25 are unemployed. There are lots of market mismatches in different places, but what we see is the greatest challenge of this pace and spread of change is the lack of stability. And so we have to help more people to be able to navigate building their own portfolios of work. And that's the greatest single strategy for individuals.
We interrupt this podcast episode for a quick word from our sponsors over at Hint. If you don't know about Hint yet, the brand is all about making the everyday more enjoyable. It started when Kara Golden, Hint's founder, needed a way to drink more water, but wanted flavor without the sugar and sweeteners that come in most drinks. So she created Hint Water. It has just a hint of flavor from real fruit essences without any of those added sugars or sweeteners. Everyone at the Grow Wire office is a big fan of Hint, and in particular...
I'm stopping you. What were you going to say? You like the
fizzy ginger.
Oh my God. The one time you actually say the real flavor.
Well, see, you thought
and
I was going to zig and I zagged.
Assuming does what? I know. I did that to you right now.
That's right.
Ugh, all right.
Apologize, Kendall.
I apologize.
Oh, that was not a very heartfelt one, but that's all right. I'll take it. You should try out the Hint Water for yourself. Go to hint.co/welcome to get 30% off your first purchase. You also talk, and you've kind of alluded to this here, about becoming lifelong learners. And so it sounds like, in the old world, you did whatever school you did. You at 19 became with your counseling skills, you counseled yourself, don't go to school. But you became a lifelong learner.
So in the same way that we have a portfolio of work, I talk about a portfolio of learning. In the old rules of work and the old rules of learning, The reason you invested in that upfront chunk of education is because you were going to amortize that investment through a big chunk of your work life. But in an exponentially changing world, the model of the 3 boxes is no longer going to prepare you to be able to continually adapt. And so I wrote a long piece called Unbundling Higher Education, and my basic thesis, the whole unbundling model comes from a good friend of mine by the name of John Hagel at Deloitte's Center for the Edge. But the basic thesis is that what ends up happening if we think of ourselves as only learning at this front end of our lives and then having basically stable work after that, there will still be work like that. But I couldn't tell you today what it will be. I can't tell you if you're a lawyer or you're a doctor, you're still going to be doing the same work in 10 years. As a matter of fact, I can pretty much guarantee you it's going to be very, very different. And so in the same way you want a portfolio of work, a portfolio of learning would mean several things. The first is that you remain constantly curious. You must, because there will always be new things to learn. And even if you stop out to have a kid or to take a gap year or anything that would keep you out of the workforce for a period of time, one of the greatest maladies of our time is that people feel like they're immediately out of touch. Well, everybody's going to feel that way. Technology is moving too fast, pace and spread of change. So instead, if you think of yourself as constantly curious, there are always new things you will be fascinated by. That is the first spark to drive you towards what some of your future work might be, the future problems that you might solve. The next is we have way too much investment in our education systems in what are often called knowledges, that is, bodies of information that are anchored in a particular arena. So your knowledge of brain surgery doesn't help you to repair a car engine, or hopefully vice versa. But that's anchored or rooted in that arena. Your knowledge of journalism, of being able to do storytelling, you would think would be anchored in that arena. But the truth is there are these other groups of what are called transferable skills. Those are skills that are usable in a range of different situations. So when you were 5 years old, you wanted to stay up past your bedtime and you went to go try to convince your parents, and suddenly you did. Well, what you've just demonstrated is a skill that would be persuading or convincing. And in the future, you might be a salesperson. You might be in business development. You might be a politician. Well, okay, maybe not. But the general premise is now you've got this whole range of transferable skills usable in a range of situations. And of course, today we call those knowledges hard skills, and we call the transferable skills soft skills. But the basic premise is our schools are all designed to shove knowledges into our heads, when all the information in the world was in the heads of teachers and on the bookshelves in the schools. Where is the knowledge of the world today? It's in the digital distraction devices we all carry around. And so the gathering of information will increasingly be more just in time, that is, it's just before I need it, and just in context. It'll be the way that I need to solve this problem in front of me, and just the information to solve that while I'm doing it.
And so what do you think this unbundling of education will look like? I mean, it hasn't happened yet necessarily, but I was actually listening to a podcast with Malcolm Gladwell, and he was talking, he did basically an exercise where he discovered or found the data that proved that as a lawyer, being a good lawyer, it doesn't matter where you go to law school. And the data proves it out, right? Maybe it matters when you get your first job or whatever. But if you take that and you kind of, I used to tell kids who didn't know, they were in college and they didn't still know what they wanted to get a degree, and I just get the damn degree and let's, and then do whatever you want, because I can tell you the resumes I see and the people I hire, oftentimes, more than half the time, it has nothing to do with what they studied in school, right? But we still have this hierarchy and value we place on that. So what does that unbundling look like, in the next few years, the next 10 years? How does education need to change?
So the education system that we have, and especially college, I want to make clear first off that I have no moral standing in this regard, since I actually didn't go. But my belief is that system actually had a bunch of clearly had a bunch of value. But both my parents went to Harvard, my wife went to USC, my son just graduated from Oberlin with an archaeology degree, so of course he's financially set for life. Why did we do that? Well, basically, a set of different deliverables. There's a reason why we did it. We wanted to grow up. We wanted to gather information and learn hopefully a field or a trade or so on. But the model of that was all based on this belief that we would be making an investment that would then have continuing returns. Now, as a business model, I always say, what business in the world do you know of that treats you for 4 years as a customer and the rest of your life as a cash register? I mean, that's what most colleges, certainly in the U.S., are today, right? The warm glow of having been there, you're just going to keep on giving to them. So here's what the new model could look like. So first off, the inflection point of being 17, 18, and on the cusp of adulthood. I believe this is one of the largest business opportunities in the history of the planet, because parents often are still following the old rules of work, thinking their child should be going to the right school and getting the right degree and getting into the right field. And it's too many rights. It's all based on the old rules of work. They thought that was what gave future, value, allowed you for future success. In a world of exponential change, really that inflection point, you will have a range of options open to you, from doing a gap year, going off to working for a nonprofit in Africa for the year. You've got all these different options that will be available to you, and one of them will be college. But helping to navigate that process and to do it in a way that actually helps the student, the young person, to learn how to be a successful adult is actually what the deliverable is. And in the past, we called that college, and in the future, we're going to call that a range of different situations. And so a range of different opportunities. And it isn't that college will go away. It's just like radio hasn't gone away. There will be more and more alternative ways to continually learn throughout your life. And it creates a business opportunity for higher education institutions. I mean, so you change your profile on LinkedIn, which of course means you're looking for a job, and suddenly you get an email message from your alma mater, and they say, hey, it looks like you're going to reinvent your life. Why don't you come back for a day, a week, a month, a year? Why don't you learn online? Why don't you join a cohort of your graduating class who are all going through reinventing themselves, and we'll help you to go to the next step. So this is one of the greatest business opportunities in the world. This is going to change before our eyes. We actually are seeing this already. 25% of all the place-based private liberal arts colleges in the United States last year were at credit risk. So what's ended up happening is, I've got this thesis where I basically say the internet evaporates the middle. If you're a small business that is locally focused and niched, or there's very large, big multinational businesses, those are the ones that tend to be the most successful. And in industry after industry, the internet has evaporated the middle. So my thesis is the same thing will happen to higher education. Is you'll always have the Ivy Leagues, you'll always have the community colleges, but it's the in-between part that will be more and more challenging. And those are the organizations that will have to morph the most dramatically.
And they'll have to, and they have an opportunity to create these, learning environments, these always-on learning environments.
And it's also an opportunity for small to mid-sized businesses. I mean, if you think about this, first off, you tend to be more nimble. You tend to be more responsive to the customer, closer to the customer. You don't have the challenges of scale, which is often, or as many of the challenges of scale, which is often, the continual management of this huge portfolio of workers and trying to optimize them. You have the ability potentially to be able to have stronger market signals. If you can help to hire and develop much more adaptive employees that think of themselves as lifelong learners, then you're a learning organization. So I talk about 4 sort of skills for tomorrow, and everybody's got this sort of 21st century sort of model. Mine is, I call it PACE, because I talk so much about the pace of change. Problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. Problem solvers because that's why we pay people and why people pay us. There's always 1 or 2 people in a company that think their job is to create problems, and you know who they are. But for the most part, we're problem solvers. Adaptive because that exponential curve of change is not going to slow down as far as we can tell. Creative because that's what keeps us ahead of robots and software. And finally, with empathy, which sounds like it's a little anomalous, but if you take those 4 characteristics, a problem solver who's adaptive, creative, with empathy, that defines an entrepreneur. You must continually have a problem-solving machine that is adapting, meeting the needs of a customer creatively and on an ongoing basis. It defines agency. Anybody who feels like they can continually creatively solve problems will be curious about the next problem they can solve, and the next one, and so on. And so I will preach this to anybody from leaders in K-12 education to in adult continuing education, small businesses, medium businesses, and large. If we can help every individual to have pace, to continually think of themselves as solving the problems of tomorrow, then we'll all be far more adaptive as that landscape continues to change.
So I want to pick on that for a minute. There was recently the Business Roundtable memo, which basically kind of put out there, and these are CEOs of some of the biggest organizations in the world, and they basically said maybe shareholder value is not the end all and be all. Maybe there are some other values, and you've talked about this kind of thing a lot. As people come into organizations, and you treat them more as problem solvers rather than, just cogs in the wheel to serve shareholders, it kind of changes the equation. But how do we get there?
So in my wanderings driven by adult attention deficit, back in the early 2000s with several partners, we started a nonprofit called Collective Intelligence. And our basic question was, how could you accelerate the flow of capital to good? That is, how could you help there to be more and more people that wanted to do positive things in the world? And we realized we think of good as only happening in the area of philanthropy. That's where we donate money, and that's what foundations do. But if it turns out the majority of economic value is created by business, and the United States, depending upon how you run the numbers, it's basically only 1.5% to 2.5% of our gross domestic product you could assign to philanthropy, and the rest of it's all business. So if you, aside from government, and so if you could shift that model, well, what would it look like? Well, so in the model where all you're doing is meeting the needs of your shareholders, we're really clear now that there's a whole bunch of negative consequences that come. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want to have active and free markets. What it means is that our peculiar form of capitalism has some inevitable negative consequences for society. So if we're only meeting the needs of shareholders, then we're going to pollute. We're going to lay off massive numbers of employees if we suddenly aren't profitable. We're going to continually shift our business models where we are focused on productivity and nothing else. And what ends up happening is all these other potential stakeholders fall by the wayside, and we see it time and time again. So we said back in the early 2000s, what would create the conditions under which more people would build business with a purpose? And it was things like you needed better entrepreneurs. You needed new forms of capital. You needed new forms of corporations. So now we have things like benefit corporations. And you needed to have existing corporations where courageous leaders would say, wait a minute, I still need to meet some of my shareholders' expectations, but the way I'm going to do that is by expanding the range of stakeholders for the organization. And that includes my employees, my partners, the communities in which I operate, the planet, all the above. And every organization needs to be on a journey where it is continually figuring out what are those new values that drive us to be able to deliver value in the market. Now, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you didn't have this wave of young people that are walking in the door and saying, I want meaning from the beginning. Often the old rules of work said, no, go achieve everything you can, make a whole bunch of money, and then in that period formerly known as retirement, that's when you'll give some of it away. And instead, there's a Japanese concept of ikigai that I talk about all the time. And that's basically the combination of what you can get paid for, what you're good at, what you love doing, and what the world needs. Now, in the old rules of work, it was just what you can get paid for and maybe what you're good at. What my father introduced with What Color's Your Parachute was, no, actually, you should be doing what you would love. You will be more driven in a world of constant change if you're doing what you love, and if you want to solve the problems you feel you're optimized to solve. And then young people nowadays will, in addition, add, and it has to be something that solves the problems for the world. And as a matter of fact, they'll flip the stack. They'll often walk in the door saying, I want to do something I feel has an impact in the world. And if it's something that I love, well, yes, that's what I'll love doing. And then I'll get good at it because I love it. Oh, and if I get paid, that's kind of like the last order, right? And so I get people, leaders of companies asking me all the time, why won't young people work for my company? And it's because this is increasingly the calculus that's driving a lot of their decision making. And ultimately, I believe it's going to be one of the greatest impetuses in how organizational leaders, courageous organizational leaders, are going to transition the process by which they decide what their companies, what their strategic goals are and the value they want to create.
Which American company started with a guy in a garage, was featured on Shark Tank, and now has over 1 million customers? Hint, they're reducing crime in neighborhoods everywhere. Here's Ring Video Doorbell founder Jamie Siminoff with his secret to success.
It's true. In just a few years, we've had huge growth. We've hired hundreds of people, expanded our warehouse, and we're shipping millions of units a year, all while making sure our customers are happy. I've had lots of things to worry about, but I never worry about our finance and accounting because we use NetSuite from Oracle. From the beginning, NetSuite let me see what's going on with my business in real time, from revenues to expenses, customers and orders, even HR. I run my business from a dashboard right on my phone. NetSuite has been my business management system from 10 to a team of over 1,000, and NetSuite will be my choice as we continue to innovate and grow.
Go to netsuite.com/ring to see how Jamie scaled his business. You'll also get our free guide titled Overcoming Your 5 Obstacles to Growth. That's netsuite.com/ring for your free guide and the story of a great American company. netsuite.com/ring.
I want to talk a little bit about the strategies of organizations. And one of the companies I've heard you talk about is Valve Software, which I kind of forgot that they did this, but that there's no hierarchies there. There's no job titles there. Now, Valve is basically a platform. Well, they make Steam, which is the platform for all the wonderful video games that exist. So what, are those the kind of strategies that companies will need to? I mean, that's only one part of that equation of what you laid out for what people want when they come to work, but it starts to break down that traditional way of doing things.
So Valve is a great example of what are often called leaderless organizations. And some people say, well, that could only work in technology. But the truth is, Gore Industries, the company that makes Gore-Tex, has essentially followed a leaderless model since 1967. And we can talk at the macro level, like what are the big shifts that are occurring in the ways that organizations create value and run themselves, and then what at the macro level, like what would you do as a manager and a leader? So let me hit both of those quickly. Our construct of the modern organization actually goes all the way back to the time of Alexander the Great, when you needed to literally move men and machines from one place to another. And the process of trying to get someone to follow an order could take a year, when the greatest communication technology that existed at the time was the carrier pigeon. And so you needed a hierarchy. One person tells two people and so on, all the way, and that might take months or years to path down throughout the organization. Well, we have these digital distraction devices that allow us to commute instantaneously with half the world's population. And we have the ability to actually use these exponential technologies to completely reconceive the way that we design and run our organizations. Now, the problem is, again, managers and leaders have been trained in those old rules of work, in hierarchy, in positional power, and so on. And we are literally working on the car as it's running down the highway 70 miles an hour, and we're transforming what an organization is to a couple of precepts. The first is that we actually have failed in a variety of ways to help people, humans, to get engaged in their work and to continually solve the problems of the organization. Gallup does a survey every year. Their numbers are very clear. Only 20% of workers in the United States say they're engaged in their work, and 18% will admit that they are actively working against their organizations. So 4 out of 5 workers in an organization are not engaged, and 1 out of 5 are actually trying to sabotage it. And so that, to me, my calculus is, well, it's because we're not asking people to bring all themselves to their organizations. And it doesn't mean you have to live only for your work. Instead, what it means is you have a range of skills and capabilities you can bring to the organization. And as a leader of the organization, you have no idea. You only see the tip of the iceberg. You have no idea the skills running around in your organization. So you're going to have to support more autonomy. You're going to have to move away from what we often call the sage on the stage kind of leadership to the guide on the side, where you are actually enabling a team of workers to dynamically bind around a series of problems, do that on a project-centric basis, collaborate, potentially even with a range of workers around the world, and that is going to be a constantly shifting portfolio of problems that your workers are solving. So the old model of an organization, which I often call a box, there's abundance outside the box, lots of people want to get in, and it's scarcity inside the box, only a few jobs, has to shift, if you can picture a network where there actually is no clear edge to the organization. It blurs the lines between employees, partners, gig workers, contract workers that you're getting through online work platforms, crowdsourcing. There's all these different ways that people can be helping and contributing to the value of your organization that have nothing to do with the traditional employer-employee relationship. But that requires an entirely new mentality around leadership and management.
And how, I feel like this is an unfair question, but how do we get there?
So I'll give you a thought exercise. I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning, which again is ironic, on future of work, future of learning, that sort of thing. And so I've got one thought exercise that I use in one of these. So you're a manager. So let's just say you have a dozen people that work for you, and you come in on Monday morning, and you say, "I'm not sticking around today. I want each of you to take a Post-it note. And I want you to write on each Post-it note a problem you solve in a typical week. And I want you each to write down, it doesn't matter what the number of problems are, just keep on writing down problems you solve. And then I want all of you to put those problems up on the whiteboard. You come in on Tuesday morning, and I'm not sticking around today. I want you to each write down on a different colored Post-it note all of the tasks you perform to solve those problems. And again, one for each Post-it note, typical tasks you perform in a given week, and then put those on the board and see how they might line up with the problems that you're solving. Day 3, what are the skills each of you brings? What are the unique skills that you're bringing to perform those tasks and to solve those problems, and put those up on the board? Now, this actually is, when I talk about the future of work, this is my construct for what I call work to be. Mechanically, work is just human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. That's it. You come in on day 4, you're the manager, say, "Oh, I'm not sticking around today. Here's what I want you to do. I want you guys to reorganize all of those Post-it notes, throw away tasks we don't need because we fall in love with our tasks and we forget the problems we were trying to solve in the first place. Realign the problems and your skills for what each of you is best at. Put a bunch of red Post-it notes up on the board where actually we don't have the skills to solve these problems, or we need to either get trained in those or hire new people, and reorganize all of the workflow, the ways that we're solving the problems so the right people are solving the right problems. And oh, by the way, I want you to do this every month." So are you going to do this exercise? You don't have to, but I've had people ping me on LinkedIn and say, "Yeah, I tried that." And what it is as a thought exercise is how you can become that guide on the side. And what you realize is that model of having to be the leader with all the answers, what's often called the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization, is the one that always makes the default decision. Instead, becoming that guide on the side, you become the one with the best questions. You don't have to have all the answers. It's instead, how can you understand the problem you're trying to solve better? And then how can you as a manager step back? I mean, this is just as hard for parents as it is for managers. Your kid falls down, don't you want to pick the kid up? But you won't always be there. And so, same thing with a manager. You can't solve every problem. And instead, the leaderless mentality, which you started by asking about Valve Software, that's never perfect either, because there's always a shadow hierarchy and personalities, and we're political animals. But instead of the continued focus is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And especially the problem for the customer. And then the next thing I talk about is alignment. Really radical alignment. Like, what are the ways you can continually link your organization so that what leaders of the organization are constantly saying are the top line strategic goals of the organization are linked to what each individual is trying to accomplish. And it's a constant flow backwards and forwards. If you want to poster children at a smaller scale, Asana Software, which is basically building collaboration software. Dustin Moskovitz, the co-founder, was actually a co-founder of Facebook. He spent 2 years with his co-founders designing the company before they started it. They stop every 4 months And they'd spend a week aligning the organization around the strategic goals. What were we trying to accomplish the last 4 months? What do we need to accomplish in the next 4 months? Go. Salesforce every year stops and does something called V2MOM. And I can never remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically, what are the values of the organizations? What are our strategic goals? How do we realign every single person in the organization? And it's a 20-year-old organization now. They've been doing this every single year, where they stop and they say, what are we all trying to accomplish together? And so if you think of this as being much more leaderless, what Novartis calls bossless, how you can continually pull yourself back from being the one with the answers to the one with the questions. And then you think of constant alignment that flows back and forth through the organization. Those are two of the strategies that I would suggest, especially for small to medium-sized businesses, because you can be that much more nimble competitor to be able to bake these kinds of processes into your organizations.
I want to end with, because I want to be cognizant of your time, and I also want to I'm going to completely shift this because I could go on all day on some of these things and keep pressing into them for more answers. But I know you do a lot of work with kids all over the world. And so I want to end with a question about what do you take away from all of your work with kids about what the future of work is going to be through their eyes?
So first off, I mentioned earlier on about that part of the rhetoric around the future of work is often robots and software taking our jobs. And I always say this is very self-serving for Silicon Valley, which we're soaking in right here. Basically, high-tech dances in the end zone when we say that. Technology wins, humans lose, we get all the money, right? And so I don't buy that rhetoric. But the message, unfortunately, we're giving to our young people is very simple. Give up. There won't be any work for you, right? Robots and software, done. Job apocalypse, and that's why we need universal basic income. What I say, so there's really two sort of phases I think of. So when a kid is young, parents will ask me, how do I know my kid's going to be okay? And what I say is, if I've seen one characteristic that seems to continually drive a lot of benefits later on in life, it's deep curiosity. Your kid is all in on something. And I don't care if it's insects or bows or dinosaurs. There's something the kid dives into, and you encourage that so that they can continually, if it's dinosaurs, then you do math by dinosaurs, you do reading by dinosaurs, everything that filters through that passion. And then it won't be dinosaurs, and that's great because you want them to continually practice that muscle of being fascinated by something. And then when kids are more like later teens and they're thinking about that inflection point, parents ask me, how can my kid be happy and successful? And the first thing I say is drop successful, or rather, don't think about success in work, think about success in life. Because if your kid's going to be happy, you're following the old rules of work, the right school, the right job. You will not give them the right guidance. You just can't. The world of exponential change, I can't give you exactly the right guidance. What I can tell you is you need to help to create a kid who is a problem solver, who's adaptive, creative, and has empathy. That's really what the deliverable is. So instead, help your kid to learn a set of skills that allow them to understand their own basic capacity, their own capabilities, what we often call self-inventory, to be able to continually be curious and fascinated by the different scenarios where they could use those skills, and then to enable them with the tools so that they can actually go and find or create that work. And my father actually broke this down. He called it what, where, and how. What's unique about you? Where can you use those skills? Because every single human being has a unique mix of them, but because nobody gave you the user manual of you, when you were born, your parents didn't suddenly get this, the nurse didn't come and say, okay, here's the user manual. Here's what the kid's going to be good at. Here's what they're going to love to do. No, nobody gave you that. We all had to become trial and error machines. And then the third piece is the how, is the mechanics, like the ways that you will continually do that. And if you can learn those at a young age, then you will be able to adapt to virtually any set of circumstances in the future.
Well, that is a great note. I'm still trying to do that, by the way, but that is a good note to end on. Thank you so much.
Great talking to you.
In case you didn't have a chance to write that down, let me help you out. We need to be teaching younger generations how to be problem solvers through creativity adaptability, and empathy. Very powerful stuff, even older generations.
Yeah, I think everybody can learn from that, for sure.
I'd like to thank my friend Gary Bolles for joining us on this episode of the GrowWire podcast. I also want to thank our sponsors, Hint and Ring, our great editors over at Lampstand, as well as our producer, Kendall Fisher. Thank you, Kendall. Thank all of you for tuning in. We can't wait to do it again next time.